Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, getting your $5,000 Neumann microphone serviced at the repair shop, or else a scrappy upstart, rapidly unplugging and plugging in your USB mic to get it to work, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the first Friday of November 2021, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Julian who drove a Chevy Blazer with a Daffy Duck hood ornament, and who was always trying to sell you over-the-counter amphetamines that he packaged in branded dime bags. And old Julian would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music, and merch, commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes live. I'm taking questions live. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I think that we're building something of a little community over there on Sunday nights, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. Every Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, over on YouTube. Head on over to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon, you search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time to do that. I very much appreciate you. If you're not in a place to contribute to the show in that way, I totally understand. You could still help out our show for free by doing one of two things. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. Needless to say, this was an absolute pleasure to pick the brain of such an accomplished songwriter. I hope you guys enjoy our chat. Our guest this week is one of the founding members of an indie rock institution that's been recording groundbreaking music for albums, film, and television for 4 decades now. John Flansburgh formed They Might Be Giants with his musical co-conspirator John Linnell in 1982. Originally part of a thriving DIY music scene in Brooklyn, New York, they broke onto the national stage with their album Flood in 1990, which garnered extensive play on modern rock and college radio and eventually went platinum. They performed Bob Mould's song Dog on Fire, which became the iconic theme song for The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. And they contributed the theme song to the hit television series Malcolm in the Middle. They recorded a series of children's albums for the Disney Sound label, including Here Come the ABCs and Here Comes Science, that went gold. They've recorded for Elektra, Barsuk, Rounder, and Rough Trade Records. They've won 2 Grammy Awards and a Tony Award for Best Original Score for the SpongeBob SquarePants musical. Spin Magazine has said that they span different musical genres, cruising from one to the next with carefree panache. NPR has noted that they know how to craft an addictive refrain and exactly when to deploy it. Rolling Stone has called them a pair of misfits who reconfigured what it means to be cool. And The Atlantic once wrote an article simply titled, The Enduring Appeal of They Might Be Giants. What a privilege it was to speak with John about his musical journey over the years.
I am very intrigued. I have questions.
Let's start. Yeah, go ahead.
Working songwriter. Is it really working songwriters, or is it just performers who have carved out a career for themselves?
What's the difference between those two things?
Well, at first I thought this will be interesting because it'll be about like work for hire and like dealing with that whole secret enterprise. But I realized that it's, you just have like all these, legitimate artists talking about their craft. It's
mainly troubadours. It's like that's been my career for like the last 10 or 15 years. I write my own songs. There's a small cohort of people that are kind of into them, and I travel around to small clubs to play for them. So that's how the show started, talking to people like that, and now
I hear that
it's a little different. Yeah.
See, I thought it was going to be like people doing their Madison Avenue hustle.
Is that like the modern term for like a Tin Pan Alley songwriter, basically?
Oh, I mean, I have friends who do, music for television and music for, all sorts of different, music and advertising and stuff like that. So it's like, and that's a world unto itself. That's it's another hustle.
That seems like it. I had planned on starting this interview in a different way, but I now want to go in a different direction now that we're talking about this. This is where I wanted to.
I didn't need to hijack my.
No. This is a good hijacking. The only problem is this is where I planned on ending the interview. But let's start it there and see where it goes. You have worked in so many different mediums as a songwriter. It seems like that is your calling almost as an artist. You feel like. You feel almost, it looks like you feel compelled to work in new mediums all the time. How conscious of that are you, or you just tend to work and the songs end up in different mediums because that's how it worked out?
I think it's sort of a combination of things. It's probably half and half. I mean, something like the Dial-A-Song service, which was sort of the introduction to They Might Be Giants that a lot of people started with. That was very much something that came out of my imagination and John Linnell's imagination, and just being up for the challenge of refreshing that project on a regular basis. That kind of ran in opposition to what our natural temperament to be kind of home taping, Steely Dan, kind of precious recording type people that we were. All of a sudden the call was for just like lots of songs, lots of new songs, keeping it new, and putting it in this format that was just completely unlikely. I mean, playing songs on a phone machine is probably the worst audio experience you can have, but it was an interesting way for people to find out about the band, and it was an interesting way to kind of approach songwriting for us. But later on, I think the world was kind of hunting for us. I mean, having a song on television, like The Daily Show or Malcolm in the Middle, those opportunities, we wouldn't know where to find those people. Those people found us, and I feel like we were lucky that we got to do those works for hire. But they were definitely it wasn't something that like we pursued.
Talking about that dial a song service, it's always interesting to me how a medium can actually change the way people do their artistic process going forward. I think in a couple ways, it sounds like it changed you. Number one, you had to create at volume, write a number of songs. And number two, like you said, like you couldn't imagine a worse audio medium. So you kind of had to, did you have to shift literally the way that you were writing songs so that they would come across in that format?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we had to. I mean, first of all, it just made everything very vocally driven, because the vocals were the things that kept people interested in what we were doing. Instrumental passages really didn't work, and there was this other odd side effect of if you had an instrumental section that had long sustained tones, it would make the message reject to the top. It thought it was the end tone. So anything that went boop would just basically automatically send it shuffling back to the beginning of the message. So we couldn't have anything. We couldn't even sing long sustained notes without running the risk of it making the machine go, reject. So some of it was just very eccentric, on the job training, and other things kind of made us key into what held people's attention. I mean, the word thing was interesting because it made you realize how much audiences really key in on words. Yeah, I think we might not have thought that words mattered that much up until then.
What made you realize that people were keen in on the words rather than something else?
Well, I mean, if you really want to know how little people like any song, if you put it on a phone machine and listen to people hanging up on it all day, you'll find out. We would try wheeling out instrumentals on it, and they would just be, people would just hang up after 10 seconds, But it just seemed clear that the ones that had clear lyrics grabbed people in a much more direct way, and we would retain. People would listen to the entire recording, and they would just. It just was obviously more popular. It's hard to say exactly how we gauged it, but I can assure you that it was self-evident.
It's funny, in some ways this has parallels to the way that if you listen to recordings from the, let's say 50s, maybe a little bit into the 60s, like a Chuck Berry recording, the mix for those, because he was working with very limited output options where audiences were listening to it, it's always vocal, snare drum, and then everything else falls to the wayside, basically. It's funny, but there you were 40 years later, kind of forced into the same conundrum and coming to the same solution that he came to 40 years before.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I'm an advocate for really loud vocals. I mean, I've read enough interviews with recording engineers that if you read if there's like some round table of 5 hit making recording engineers, they'll tell you that they'll always end up talking about the conundrum of making the vocal loud enough for the artist, or loud enough for the management, or loud enough for the record company, or loud enough for pop radio, because when you have sort of persona driven recordings, whether it's Snoop Dogg or Adele or some country artist, making the vocals crazy loud is pretty much it's been that way for almost forever. It's certainly not the most musical way to mix a record, but that's where a lot of people's interest lies. I'm always surprised at how loud people make vocals. It's not my scene, but I'm aware that there are levels. I'm trying to think that some live engineer that we worked with was talking about the hierarchy of crazy vocal levels. He was like, there's rock vocals, there's pop vocals, there's country vocals, and then there's hip hop vocals. And that's like the hip hop vocals are the far and away the loudest.
Oh, so that was in ascending order.
Yes.
Wow.
Exactly.
So you said that in some ways, working in that medium was in direct opposition to how you started, kind of like a more Steely Dan. Let's do overdubs for 18 hours.
I mean, we were teenagers with like a TAC 4-track. It was hardly state of there were no German microphones within.
Fair enough.
Within miles of us, but I think like just the impulse of kind of rolling around in the joy of exploration and recording is something that like is familiar to us.
Sure, but I mean that looks a lot different in the early 1980s than it looks now. I mean, you get a MacBook off the shelf these days, and you have basically a recording studio in it with preamps and everything, digital. Back then, very different deal. I don't think a lot of people were necessarily trying to record themselves. What drove you guys to say, hey, we can do this all ourselves. We can figure it out?
Well, I think we were kind of self-selected. John is like this amazing musical force unto himself. I mean, he's not an autodidact, but there's something going on there. Like John can play the drums really pretty well. I mean, at least for like 10 minutes, he can play the drums pretty well. And he can play a lot of instruments in kind of a serviceable way. And I owned a tape recorder before I owned any musical instruments. I was really obsessed with recorded sound and really obsessed with audio, and from a very early age. So I think both of us had these, personal obsessions that were very much in play right from the jump. I mean, I had a TAC 4-track tape recorder in the 70s, and when some people, I mean, they were being manufactured and people were buying them, and I think they were using them to make bootleg recordings of various kinds, record things off the radio and stuff like that. But I don't think a lot of people were thinking in terms of doing sound on sound recording to make demos. I think that was kind of not the general direction people went in.
When do you remember a first moment when the two of you realized that you had very complementary creative palettes to work from?
We just had a lot of fun. I think, to be perfectly honest, I don't think we, when the early times that we got together and made recordings, it was just goofing off in the most extreme way. I mean, I remember we made a recording. We did a cover version of "Don't Worry, Kyoko" by Yoko Ono, where I mean, I have no idea where this recording still exists, but we were doing it. We kind of put a musical track together that was like our version of the bed track that was the Yoko Ono song, and then we did the vocal. It's a very extreme song. It's a Yoko Ono song, so it's already kind of nuts in the first place. But we were doing Rod Serling voices doing the vocals, so that was just that was just something that we did when we were like 15 or 16 years old, and it was just goofing off. And I think the opportunity to goof off in a as young adults seemed kind of interesting. When we started the project, kind of in the shadow of John's more professional band, John was the keyboard player in like what I sort of perceived as a real band, and so we were just doing They Might Be Giants. It was very unclear how much acceptance the band could ever get. I mean, the material we were doing seemed kind of extreme, and it didn't seem particularly in tune with what was on the radio or what was popular. It just was kind of our own. It was just the stuff that we liked.
It's funny. I hear so many stories on this podcast of people saying, well, I had this thing that was my real thing. And the real thing was just going all right. And then this thing that I was doing on the side that, I won't say that you took less seriously, but that you just never expected anyone to key into. That's the thing that has legs for 30 years for you. Like, what do you think?
Right.
What is the disconnect there? Yeah. What's the deal?
Well, I think audiences do key in on what is sort of authentic in a more abstract sense. I think a lot of times people throw around the word authenticity like they're talking about sincerity or the bearing of emotion in a song, like that's trying to communicate directly to an audience. But I think authenticity is one of those terms like selling out, that it doesn't really. There's no such thing as authenticity. Singing a song is not an authentic thing to do. It's a performance, and I'm not saying that musicians are the same as actors, but there's something. It's presentational, and it's not real life. But I think when musicians figure, actually, the closer musicians get to doing exactly the thing that they are best at and enjoy the most, and that's a Venn diagram that doesn't always overlap. I think that's when you really run the risk of really communicating with an audience.
Why do you say run the risk of communicating with an audience?
Well, I mean, what's interesting is that, like, when we started, like, I do remember our very first show in They Might Be Giants. We played at a place. Well, we before we were called They Might Be Giants, we played outside at like a political rally, and that was sort of a UFO. I didn't really have any takeaway from what that meant to anybody. But the first time we actually played in a nightclub, it was me and John and a tape recorder with a drum track, and we sort of set it up so that the songs kind of ran into one another because we were nervous that people weren't going to applaud, and we were doing a lot of material that was half the material was kind of histrionic, like a little bit art rocky, like it was not so song based. It was a little bit of screaming and it was just not the most mass appeal kind of stuff, and we didn't really know how the audience was going to respond. And I think there was a band that we loved that John and I both saw live a couple of times, and we had their records. This band out of Ohio called Perubu, who were one of the very first kind of new wave punk rock bands, and they were a very singular band, kind of artsy, a lot of yelling, a lot of there's like glass being broken on their records, and there's really hard to listen to synthesizers and all sorts of things going on that are just kind of keeps a lot of listeners at arm's length. And I think we kind of fashioned ourselves as being in that kind of tradition. Like we thought like we would just be understood to be, some vaguely pretentious art rock kind of thing. And really from the jump, I mean, from the minute we started playing songs in this club, it was clear that people just were kind of getting like a chuckle out of what we were doing. Like we were just making people smile. And I don't, nobody declares that they're a snob, and or that nobody says like my band's pretentious. But I think our band was a little bit. I think we were approaching it with the idea that we were doing something that was a little bit artsy, and but it didn't go down that way. It wasn't perceived that way. I think people really just saw us performing and they thought like, these guys are fun, and that's just and really from that moment on, that audience perception of the band has kind of reframed just my essential take on what we were doing. I mean, I think in a strange way, I still think of what we were doing as before I was aware of how the audience was taking it in.
I think a lot of artists, though, when faced with that conundrum in front of them, they would feel some sort of responsibility or some sort of desire to kind of grab the audience by the lapels and say, no, that's not what this is about. Let me tell you what this is about. This is a snobby art rock project. What do you think it is about your personality or John's that or your character that allowed you to almost let go of how the art was being perceived and almost in some ways allow how the art was being perceived to shape how the project went forward?
That's a really good question. I'm not, I like the idea of when you said character, I was like, you mean the character I play in life?
Maybe.
No. Well, this reminds me of conversations I've sort of overheard and sometimes participated in with, like, when you talk to people who are stand-up comedians or comedy writers, a lot of times they'll end up talking about people laughing the wrong way, and which is such a strange thing. It's like, if your job is to make people laugh, like, how can people laugh the wrong way? But I think that's just the nature of, like, creative enterprises, that people want it all. People want to be totally understood on their terms. They want complete success, and they want critical adoration. People want. I think it's that's just the strange fate of and sometimes it's pretty cruel. I mean, I feel like we've been lucky. They Might Be Giants is not like the best reviewed act in at least since the 90s, I guess. And I think part of that is, like, the way reviewers work is, like, the less an act needs good reviews, the less good reviews they will generate. If you're Barry Manilow, like, it doesn't matter if Barry Manilow gets bad reviews. Like, people love Barry. Barry Manilow has a huge audience that he has found, and whether you like it, whether a rock critic likes it or not, Barry Manilow is still going to be working.
Or bands like Kiss, I think, is a great example. Kiss doesn't need reviews. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that's the whole. There's so many. There's like, I think, half the musical horizon is filled with critic-proof acts that just exist. And but I do cherish those early reviews that we got, and as we become less zeitgeisty and less culturally relevant as an act, we once again we're getting glowing critical reviews, which is very pleasant. I tend to believe those reviews. I never believe the bad ones, but I think performers really are unreasonable in a sense that they really do expect everything to work. I remember when we first started doing stuff for kids. One of the things that's really weird, that's doing kids music is really interesting in a lot of different ways, because it's just so much the opposite of writing in a rock band. But when you're doing kids shows, like it's very hard to hold on to kids' attention. Like, they'll just all of a sudden half the audience isn't even looking in your direction, and you're just like, hey man, I'm up here, playing for you kids, like, pay attention. And it's just all of a sudden all your sympathies for public school teachers comes out.
Yeah, I got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a baby, and my wife is a
Holy
public
smokes.
school. Yeah, and my wife's a public school teacher. So
wow, well, there you go.
I feel all your pain.
You are in the barrel, my friend.
Yeah.
Are you Mr. Mom?
Pretty much.
Are you tending to these?
Pretty much, yeah. My wife's on maternity leave now, but I've taken a big step back from the road, and I do a lot of Mr. Momming at home.
Wow. So you'll have 4 children.
It's 3: a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a baby.
But she's the baby is. You have an infant.
We got an infant at home.
Damn.
Yeah. So I hope we're not going to have 4 children. We'll see. But I didn't think we'd have 3. So here we are.
There you go.
So take one step back from me here from that chapter of your career, because I kind of want to dive into this moment where you have, in some ways you described it, we have this almost zeitgeisty band that's coming out of this art scene in Brooklyn. And then early 90s, I think it was with your album Flood, you're signed by Elektra. And this is a major label at a time when, like, man, early 90s, like, that is when it really, really mattered to be on a major label. I mean, they had so much power and influence. How did that signing and how did that change to your business? First of all, how did it change your business? But then also, how did it change the creative arc of the band?
Well, I think, as I said, like when we started, I think we had a lot of sort of abstract ambitions for what we were doing that we kind of held on to. I think we realized that like the things we were interested in were kind of fragile, and we really wanted to protect those things and control our output and control our image, and we were just just ambitious in that way. And in a lot of ways, starting as an indie band really helped kind of slow things down for us enough to kind of control the ball a little bit. We knew how to do a lot of things before we got signed to a major label, which was really helpful. We really had a very clear idea of how things worked and the things we didn't want to do. I mean, I'll tell you, one big decision we made very early on when we started working with our booking agent is we decided not to open for anybody, which in retrospect, part of me wonders if that was just a really dumb idea. I don't. I know a lot more about the ways of the world now, and one of the things that I think is there's something very solipsistic, to use a $10 word, about being in a band, which is like you think that your actions kind of happen in a vacuum, and you don't realize that like your booking agent is constantly kind of working all his spheres of influence to make things happen for you and make things happen for the other acts that he's representing. And there's all sorts of horse trading going on. Anytime artists, you hear in interviews with artists all the time, you hear people saying like, oh, I realized my manager was just like working to get some other thing happening for some other act, as if that's some huge betrayal. That is actually the way the world works in those spheres. Like if your manager isn't just working all the angles in all the ways that they can, they're probably a pretty ineffective manager. But we were such sort of I don't know. I mean, part of it was like we were so idealistic on one hand, and we were also in some ways kind of unworldly about that kind of stuff. And we had done some opening gigs, and they were kind of unpleasant experiences in certain ways. And we just didn't want to do that. So we just said, like, we don't want to do that. And we just pushed that out. And that is, I don't know how much that held us back, but it probably held us back a fair amount. But it didn't, ultimately, we just had the career that we had.
But it also, I kind of see where you're coming from on that, because I think one of the drawbacks sometimes of doing opening shows, and I did a fair amount of those in the first 4 or 5 years of my career. Some of them were good. Some of them weren't. And the ones that weren't, it's because you're put in front of an audience in a way where you're not, as you said earlier, controlling the ball. The stage doesn't look the way that it should. Maybe the sound isn't right. And to someone who's just coming to see your show, who's just a random punter at the show, they don't give a shit about any of that. They're just like, yeah, I went to go see Joe Pug and it wasn't good. Or I went to go see the NYP Giants and it didn't. They're not going to tell you what was wrong about it. They're just going to say, I didn't like it. So I think in some ways it was very smart of you to control the ball in that way.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was like because we were working with a drum machine, there was this technical side of what we were doing that was like very fussy. Like if it just had to be set up. We couldn't just jump on a stage and play, which I'm permanently jealous of people who have such a bulletproof live setup that they can just, hit it. And those people, they're also people who are just brave that way. I think when we started, we just weren't. We really liked what we did, but I don't think we were that confident about what we did. So we could have figured it out if we had thought it through. I'm sure we could have come up with some. I don't know. I've seen bands that do like sort of this very smart live first song sound check thing, and it can be pretty winning. Like there's no particular reason you can't do that.
Yes.
And people do it successfully. But I think we just felt like there was just too much going on. I feel like I didn't answer your flood question.
Well, what other
were you-
ways were you kind of? No, you very much did. What other ways were you controlling the ball, to use your own phrase, with Elektra and that major label system? Like, what other ways? It seems like you said that you guys had some certain skills. You're kind of Liam Neeson in Taken there. I have a certain set of skills here that I can use. What other skills were you bringing to bear that put you in a kind of in the driver's seat with that imbalanced relationship?
Well, I think we had sort of an intuitive sense of like what now people on the internet refer to as the gift economy. Having done Dial a Song and done the things that we were doing, we did. We were just a very DIY act. We did a lot of stuff that was kind of, I guess, part of the thing that made we had sold a lot of records before we got on Elektra, and that was not something that they were used to. And I don't think anybody like particularly likes going to work and having somebody say like, I disagree. Like that's
right.
The record companies, often just like present schedules to you, and your job is just to say yes. We wanted to work our projects longer than they did, and that I think was tedious. And that so because a lot of times you kind of you climb onto the promo machine, and then your time is over and you go away. And we were just like, we were just kind of working our kooky hustle all the time. So that I think that seemed a little fulsome to them.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. One of the things that struck me the most while speaking with John was the sense of humility that he still brings to creative work. He's 4 decades in to a wildly successful and acclaimed creative pursuit, and yet he's still asking questions about making music, still wondering aloud. He's not making pronouncements from on high, and of all the guests that we've had on this program, he would be one of the most qualified to have done so. But it seems every artist who continues to create vital work long into their career shares this quality, a genuine humility about how art is inspired, made, and consumed, a lifelong learning process. My favorite poet, Steve Scafidi, has a poem about humility in the face of self-satisfied certainty. It's called "For My Friend Todd Hardy, Who Says We Die and That's It." And Jimi Hendrix, who seems to say the opposite every day with his guitar. I dedicate these words, written in May 2005, to mark the end of the arguments we have about the meaning of life and what happens to us after we die. For you'd think it would be enough to carry your body slung loose and broken at your side and go down to the door and walk through, but no. Thousands of years continue, Todd says, without you, and it is not enough to die. You must disappear completely, and all signs be obliterated, and the mind tries to protect us from knowing this. And well, thank you, but it's easy to see through the white veil of invention and imagination to the sad grave, heaving of nothing that is waiting. And my friend Todd Hardy says we die, and that's it. And I'd like to argue some dark spooling out of fabric with an embroidered bear walking along the mountain pass between this life and some other, and point out the burrs matted there in the bear's fur, and the beehive full of honey in the green pine she is about to climb, but the mind knows. It knows about death, and how all faith is our commitment to a guess. And my friend Todd Hardy, who collects 8-track cassettes of Jimi Hendrix and the wrecked psychedelia of heroic guitars, ruins my hope that we might live on, somehow in the spinning of an atom, or a compact disc, or the dusty fur of a bear. My friend, you win. Soon we will not even have been the dust of dust disappearing, and in 10,000 years even that dust will enter the maw of an oblivion I cannot put my faith in. So, let the sacred guesswork begin. If you have a day to work, what does a creative day look like to you?
Well, I do a lot of things that are just like sort of, ordinary performer things. I mean, I actually do vocal warm-ups, which is, exactly as exciting as it sounds for my wife. I'll do guitar stuff, guitar warm-up stuff. And then the sort of research and development part of my job is just working on the computer on rhythm tracks and kind of cooking up different drum machine stuff and maybe working on a vocal or some kind of lyric for a song. But there's no set way of working. I wish I had a better plan of how to do stuff. Sometimes I'll just I have a bunch of like old cassette recorders that I'll just grab and drag into the basement, and I'll just put a timer on my phone and try to come up with like some song idea within 20 minutes, and then I'll do that again. If I have to cook up periodically, if we've done like works for hire, or if we've got a new album project coming up, or if we're doing anything that requires just a lot of songwriting, I might try to do these sort of speed rounds of songwriting, and usually only one or two good things will come out of them, but it only takes a few hours to do that kind of thing. Like if you just chain yourself to the all-you-can rock buffet, you can cook up a song in relatively short order.
It sounds like it. When you say chain yourself to that buffet, that's just you sitting in front of your... Well, actually, here's a better question, I think. So it sounds like even when you don't have a specific project that you're writing for or towards, that you're just in writing mode, just kind of generating material, or just kind of keeping yourself interested, or just playing
I'm
around.
kind of in production mode a little bit, John and I collaborate long distance on a lot of things, so I'll send him rhythm tracks that are just drums, and like trying to write like a drum sequence that's compelling enough for somebody else to write a song on top of is its own kind of odd challenge, because you can't take the idea that much farther. Like I'm not trying to crowd out his creativity. I'm just trying to spark it. So that's one mode of working. But there have been times in our career where we have been tasked to finish a lot of musical work in relatively short order. I mean, we've done kids albums that had deadlines, hard deadlines of 2 months or something like that, and it'll be the better part of an hour's worth of music, or working on a television show where you're doing all the incidental music. That'll every week there'll be 20 cues of music, and that's what you're doing. So I mean, actually, when we were doing the incidental music for Malcolm in the Middle and doing the incidental music for The Daily Show and stuff like that, I think the whole band learned a lot about just how to speed up all the creative processes involved in writing songs. And it was really useful. I mean, it was just not just how to make recordings that sounded real, but also how to just generate ideas. And it really helped our confidence.
What are some of the skills that you had to level up with to be able to kind of create at that volume? Like, what have you gotten much better at? You don't have to be modest here at all. I'm asking you to be immodest. What have you gotten much better at over the last 25 years because of those work obligations and deadlines that you had?
Well, I mean, there's that old cliche, like, if it sounds good, it is good. Mm-hmm. I think it's like sort of it might be apocryphal, but I think people associate it with Duke Ellington. But I think it's really hard to trust that. I think there's nothing wrong with simple ideas. There's nothing wrong with just trusting your own instincts is not a mistake. But I think it's hard to say. I mean, part of it also is just you're just kind of just working with an eye to efficiency. You don't need to try out every possibility. It might be the opposite of hit making processes, because I've worked with hit maker producers, and the way they work is almost the opposite of that.
How is that?
Thing. Well, like we've worked with the Dust Brothers, who did big hits with Beck and Hanson and lots of other acts. And we worked with Clive Langer and Alan Winstanley, who did all the Madness tracks in England and did Morrissey records. And I'm trying to think of other big hit records. They've had a ton of hit records. They did the Come On Eileen with Dexys Midnight Runners, and both, even though those production teams have very little in common with one another in terms of like their aesthetics and the way they approach putting tracks together, one thing that was interesting to me is that they had unlimited patience for working on a vocal. They both of them as production teams would just be like, whatever, if it takes 2 days to get this vocal, that's fine. Just relax. We're going to be working on this for a really long time. You will be shocked at how boring it gets. It's all, we're just doing this thing. Just have another cup of tea and just chill out, because and buckle up, because this is going to take a really long time.
Wow. And now we're back where we kind of started talking about where those vocals ended up in the mix, and now hearing,
right, exactly,
how long is spent on them. You've managed to carry on a creative partnership for many decades now. Most people can't even remain decent to one another after decades. And here you are still working together, and the relationship from the outside looking in is still really fruitful as it's ever been, it seems like to me. How have you guys managed to do that?
Well, I mean, I think in a sense, we both keep each other kind of ambitious, and that's good. So it's not really a competition in any traditional sense, but I think, we're both active, and when the other person cooks up something that's impressive, I think it just naturally, falls right back to the other to kind of, keep up their end of the bargain. It's I feel very lucky that we have each other, just to also just have the conversation, sort of the inside conversations, and just be like the first audience for the other person, because it's just incredibly useful to just to not do it by yourself. I would imagine just being completely on your own would be very hard not to end up chasing your own tail.
Are there sacrifices that you have to make creatively to be a part of a partnership like that?
I wouldn't characterize it as sacrifices. I think it's no, I don't think it's all kind of a win-win. I think the one thing that sort of makes me sad is like when we started the band, John and I were just socially, really good friends, and we would just hang out all the time in casual ways, and it was very easy breezy friendship, and that was super. It was just a great. It's nice to have a close friend, and as the years have gone on, we've been, we've flown around the world sitting next to each other dozens of times. We've spent years of our lives in vans and tour buses just waiting for the next thing to happen, and I think it kind of undoes the easy friendship part of it. I mean, we're still friends. It's absolutely fine, but the impulse to just spend our spare time chilling out together has definitely been dampened.
Enough time in a 15-passenger van will do that to the best of us. I get that.
Yeah.
Well, your partnership has culminated in this latest work that you guys are putting out. Book is a total multimedia experience. This kind of goes to the start of our conversation here, because there's a lot of mediums at play here in this new project. You said something funny. I was reading in the promo materials for this. I'm going to paraphrase you here, but basically something along the lines of like, it's kind of boring to just put out an album these days. It's boring for us, or it's boring for the audience. I don't know how exactly you put it, but you wanted to do something different here. How did you conceptualize this project? And how did the final version of it compare to the conception that you had when you began?
Well, at the risk of sounding like a complete baby boomer, I really like the album experience, like the vinyl experience, but maybe for sort of slightly different reasons. It's not like some audiophile thing for me, because all my records are all scratched up. But I really enjoy album covers, and I really enjoy liner notes, and I really enjoy just that tactile, physical thing. And I guess in some ultimate way, putting Book together, I was thinking this experience is kind of like the ultimate album experience, because you, instead of just having an interesting cover that you can contemplate as you listen to the music, it has a whole book attached to it, and with all this art photography and all these elaborate lyrics laid out and hand typed up. So it really was about just kind of making a bigger experience out of the whole music listening part of it. So I can't say that it isn't sort of a psychedelic impulse. It's, a lot of times when people hear about the project, they think it's going to be a concept album, and it really isn't that. It's just a collection of songs that are all quite different from one another, like any other They Might Be Giants record. But having the book component, I think, makes it, it just expands the experience.
Looking out onto the horizon going forward, you've always been so forward thinking. I think I read that you guys put out the first major label record on MP3, like in the early 90s. No one even knew what that was. So in your opinion, looking forward, you seem to be very inspired and kind of up to the moment.
It's all about NFTs, man. NFTs.
Well, I want to ask, like, what is there on the horizon that technologically that you're interested in working with? Is it NFTs? Is it something else?
The first week I heard of NFTs, it was like on the horizon line, there were like a half dozen people coming at us going like, you guys must want to get in on this. And then pretty much at the same time, I got all these emails that were like, I'm really suspicious of what this means.
Right.
At this point, I don't even feel like I fully understand what what defines an NFT, because they're, what it means, non-fungible. A non-fungible transfer is the definition of NFT, right?
Non-fungible token, I think. Yeah.
Non-fungible token. So I know the token is the art object, but the non-fungible part seems to be kind of open-ended. It seems like a lot of things seem pretty fungible to me. I mean, as far as my understanding of the word fungible is.
Yeah. I guess.
I mean, how can you make an addition of 10,000 non-fungible things?
Well, that's the point. Is that you can't? I don't. And I'm no NFT
into NFTs.
I am no NFT apologist here at all. And I've got a new album coming out next year. It's not going to be on an NFT, but
no NFTs for you.
Yeah, I think it has to do with the idea that you can source the provenance of a digital file, so that you could say, hey. I have, whenever Jay-Z's 99 Problems came out, if you could say, I have the original MP3 of this and it can be proved, the provenance can be proved through blockchain, would that be valuable? And I guess we'll see.
I hope they can find those original Napster bootlegged MP3s and turn those into NFTs.
Well, they might.
The original 99, there were two songs that were on Napster that were titled as They Might Be Giants tracks, but they were actually, the song Fish Heads by Barnes and Barnes was mislabeled as a They Might Be Giants song. I think that would be a good NFT. The original Fish Heads by They Might Be Giants.
I think it'll either make no money or make so much money that you won't know where to park your yacht afterwards, because it'll be so big.
I'm looking forward to that.
Well, listen, this has been a real honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on to The Working Songwriter. I really appreciate it. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. They Might Be Giants' forthcoming release is an art book simply titled Book, available next week on November 12th. Head to theymightbegiants.com for more info. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.